Welcome to our regularly scheduled business meeting. To view this meeting's presentation documents, please access Board Docs. The link to the Board Docs website can be found via the D38 website on the Board of Education Meetings or /meetings webpage. Ms. Woods, could you call the roll?
Here.
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 I'll go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Dr. Summers, would you like to start us off this evening with these recognitions?
So just before we dive right in there, Mr. Taylor, quick note, we won't be able to have our Palmer Ridge High School yearbook students and staff sponsor in attendance. So as you're approving the agenda, which if you want to do that before we conduct the recognitions, I just wanted to let you know that we'll probably need to find another time. Unfortunately, we've already postponed this a couple of times. We're glad to have the folks that we are recognizing here with us, but I just wanted to call that one modification to the agenda out for you.
Thank you very much. So that would be item C3. Is it C2 also, or just C3 and 4?
It would just be C3, sir.
Okay. So C3 will be postponed due to the shutdown of Palmer Ridge High School. Not shut down.
Actually, that's not the exact reason, but because we do have a Palmer Ridge student here with us tonight, Caroline Bushnell, which we're also happy to recognize. We just were not able to accommodate all the students who we were hoping to. So we're going to find the more appropriate time to be able to.
It's a volume issue. Too many awards.
There's several variables at play. Yes, sir.
All right.
So
Well, other than that, can we get a motion to approve the agenda then?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Ms. Woods? Ms. Wood?
Aye.
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 Now we'll get into C1.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. So tonight we have local heroes among us. We have representatives from area first responder organizations throughout our Tri-Lakes community. We want to publicly express our gratitude for the support of all these organizations. These teams serve our community daily at personal sacrifice and risk. Thank you for the countless ways you take care of D38 as well as our entire community. Now, each board member is going to say a few words about one of our local first responder organizations. And I know that we've had a couple of subs that have come in last minute, which we really appreciate your flexibility on. So with that said, when the organization and the individual from that organization is mentioned, we're going to have you come up basically front and center here, and we have some items that I will share with you. I'm going to do my best also not to shake your hand. It'll be really tempting to do so, but we'll do an elbow bump to keep our distancing and protocols in check. So thank you very much.
Ready?
Ready when you are, ma'am.
All right. So first we'd like to recognize Commander John Hudson from Monument. The Monument Police Department has made relationships with our D38 school district a priority, and you've met with several district leaders, attended football games, toured schools, and this level of involvement illustrates this caliber of service Monument Police provide to our students and our families and our community. And we look forward to getting to know Chief Sean Hemingway better as well. So thank you.
Yeah, Chief Hemingway's kept stuck in the budget meeting and ran over a little bit. So I'm really proud to accept this for the past 13 years. Both of my kids have been part of District 38 from Kilmer to the middle school to Lewis Palmer High School, and I couldn't be any more proud of
Thank you for your
Thank you, sir.
service.
My next. Is Chief Nielsen here? Please come forward, Chief. For several years now, the Woodmore Public Safety supported our district with traffic issues all over the district, and they've also monitored our buildings and our properties at night to keep us safe. This team went above and beyond their normal call of duty recently during the volume of road closures we've had all around the district. They really helped provide some order and some rationale and normalness during that period of chaos, and they took it from being a hassle to being something we could handle. So thank you so much for helping us with that.
That could have been a weapon.
Thank you for testing us.
We have a great team, and we're proud to help out with the district and traffic control and everything else. And we feel like we're as much part of this community as the school board and all the school members.
Thank you for what you do.
Sure, we'll take this, sir.
Next, we have Chad Wheat. Chad, if you come forward, sir. Deputy Wheat is the Lewis Palmer High School SRO. For over 15 years, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office has partnered with District 38 to provide a school resource officer. SROs provide a variety of services to our district, including but not limited to security, staff training, classroom instruction, and building a positive relationship with their students. The connections you and other SROs make with our students truly impacts our lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. It's day one, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Yeah, first day. We love it. We're very happy to have you.
Let's get a picture.
Sir, yep. Photo op.
So Chief Christopher McCarthy, thank you. The Palmer Lake Elementary School kindergarten class takes a walking field trip to the Palmer Lake Fire Department each year. It is a favorite tradition. The Palmer Lake Fire Department is very responsive to our needs, especially when the Palmer Lake Elementary School roof caught fire a few years ago. We, along with the Palmer Lake Elementary, feel safe knowing they are there taking care of our community. Thank you very much. And I would just add a little comment about Chief Jason Vanderpool, who couldn't make it. Chief Vanderpool consistently supports Palmer Lake Elementary School. Recently, with the current ordinance of no parking on the streets of Palmer Lake, he worked with the principal of Palmer Lake Elementary, Peggy Greenabow, now, making sure staff vehicles are not ticketed. This type of support is no small thing, as it values and protects our staff. We greatly appreciate the active backing of our Palmer Lake Police. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have one additional member of the Monument Tri-Lakes Fire Protection District who was unable to join us this evening that I just want to mention, and that is Chief Chris Trudy. And we know the Monument Tri-Lakes Fire Protection District serves almost 10,000 homes in our area and over 400 businesses. And they still find time to show up at our elementary schools as they did at Prairie Winds in October for a drive-by celebration in their honor. October is or was Fire Prevention Month, and in past years, firefighters would be seen at all of our elementary schools educating students about fire safety. So we want to thank them all for protecting us and investing in our students. And then last but certainly not least, also wanted to take an opportunity to commend Dennis Coates. Dennis, you get to come up here now, front and center. Our D38 Chief of Safety and Security. Make sure to give him a challenge coin as well, sir. Yep. For nearly 2 decades, Dennis has invested in D38 as a coach, SRO, parent, and now as our Chief of Safety and Security. He has built a team of retired law enforcement officers, each with over 20 years of law enforcement service. This team works every day keeping our students and our staff safe. They build relationships that encourage and promote a positive and a safe learning environment. Thank you for your faithful service and support. I would say we are extremely fortunate to have not only the caliber of professional, but also the caliber of man that we have here in Dennis Coates. So, Dennis, thank you for all that you do. Absolutely. Do we want to try to do one more just with everybody? Yeah. Folks, if you all just join us real quick, we'll do our best. I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you all.
Go ahead.
Okay. It's now my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you Caroline Bushnell. Caroline, could you please join me up here? Well, I think once everyone hears your accomplishments and accolades, there will be a good reason to demonstrate that you certainly belong up here with us. So Caroline Bushnell is a senior at Palmer Ridge High School. She was elected as Key Club International Vice President during a July special meeting held in lieu of the 2020 Key Club International Convention. This year's convention, planned for San Francisco, was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Key Club International, which is a Kiwanis International Student Leadership Program, is a growing organization with thousands of clubs in more than 38 countries. Key Club enables high school students to lead through service and volunteerism. In partnership with local Kiwanis clubs, Key Club members make positive impacts by serving others in their schools and communities. Over the course of her membership in Key Club, Caroline has spearheaded numerous projects. She raised $1,750 for the Australian Relief Campaign, a campaign she created to save, rehabilitate, and conserve wildlife in partnership with the Australia Zoo Wildlife Warriors. She was also involved in Trick or Treat for UNICEF, a Key Club program that raises money for the Kiwanis family's fight against maternal and neonatal tetanus, and Thirsty 30, the Key Club initiative to fight the global water crisis. As Vice President, Ms. Bushnell aims to think big. She plans to innovate ways to provide service opportunities to Key Club members for decades to come. Caroline believes her positivity, support, and 8 years of experience in office will help her enable every Key Club member to find their place in serving, growing, and expanding the impact of Key Club in their communities. And just an additional note about Kiwanis International. Founded in 1915, Kiwanis International is a global organization of clubs and members dedicated to serving the children of the world. Kiwanis and its family of clubs, including Circle K International for university students, Key Club for students age 14 through 18, Builders Club for students age 11 through 14, K Kids for students age 6 to 12, and I hope I'm saying this right, Actian Club for adults with disabilities, annually dedicate more than $18.5 million service hours to strengthen communities and serve children. The Kiwanis International family comprises more than 551,000 adult and youth members in 80 nations and geographic areas, and as we know, we have a very strong and active partnership with our Monument Hill Kiwanis Club, which we're very proud of. So without further ado, Caroline, I'd like to present this to you, a challenge coin and a little something on behalf of our recognition, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to just say a few words if you like.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm going to actually cue the mic up for you, just so you can, there you go.
Is
And
that better for everybody? Which way should I face?
How about this way?
This way? Okay, awesome. So, I mean, I spend 15 to 40 to 50 hours a week doing this organization. I could talk a lot about what we've been working on this year, but more than anything, I'd just like to say thank you, because my journey in this organization started as a K kid at Bear Creek Elementary School. So without the support of this school district and all of the teachers and advisors and our local Kiwanis Club, I wouldn't have had these opportunities. So I really just want to extend a huge thank you, because I'm so grateful for everything that this organization has continued to give to me and to students and adults all over the world. I think you guys did an amazing job of talking about what I do, but I'd love to answer any questions that anybody has about Key Club, about K-Kids Builders Club, Kiwanis. Do we have any?
I have a question.
Of course.
What's beyond high school?
So beyond high school, you can join for me or for Kiwanis.
For Kiwanis and you.
So I'm planning on continuing my journey in what we call the K family beyond high school. I'll be joining Circle K at whatever university I go to, but the actual university, we're not 100% sure yet. I'm applying to a lot of business schools. I'm planning on majoring in business and then possibly going on to law school to do nonprofit or to do civil rights law. So I'm hoping that I can continue in a life of service, however that may look.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Of course.
Mr. Schwartz has one.
I don't want this to just drop.
Mr. Schwartz doesn't want to get in the way of the photo up, though.
Mic drop.
I have a quick question for you.
Of course.
Whenever you're ready.
Go ahead.
Looking back, are there some things that the district can do to further enhance the program and enhance the amount of kids that are engaged in it?
Absolutely. I mean, it was an amazing experience. I think in general, there's nothing big I can say, because it provided me every opportunity I needed to grow my leadership skills, my public speaking skills, and then even like my soft skills in business from a very young age. So in general, just getting more kids to be a part of it, this can go far beyond elementary school and can be something that you do for the rest of your life and will provide so many opportunities. I think that's the big message I would have for the district, for the schools, for Monument Hill Kiwanis, just to recognize how important this can be for people, because I think my experience in the K family has 100% sculpted who I am as a person and has set me on a path that I will follow for the rest of my life. So
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Wood, did we have any public comments? No?
So I don't need to read the public comments guidelines. All right.
That's a first for me. So agenda item C4 for public comments, we have none via email or in person. So with that, let's go to board member comments, and if we could just start with Matt and then Ron, Tiffany, and Teresa.
I'll keep my comments short. I just want to once again thank our administrative team and our teachers for the kind of the unique dynamics that COVID-19 throws our way. It seems like everyone is very malleable and always putting what's best for our kids at the forefront. So I want to commend our teachers and our team members, and especially want to thank our team here. I know they put a lot of long hours. My guess is they're actually putting in more hours now with COVID challenges than pre-COVID, so thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Ron?
Thanks, I just want to make sure I'm on. Vicki, can I trouble you to put up that photo?
Can you pull your mic around?
Near my mouth?
That's better, yeah.
It's traditional, sorry. Thanks. No, nothing special. Just want to show the photo. Thanks. So this, for those of you that are in the room, this is a photo of a young man named Drew. He was born with a rare genetic disorder called MECP or MECP2. And unfortunately, the average lifespan of this disorder is 25 years. He's now a 20-year-old man. He's been part of our district's special services program since his family moved here in 2007. And they actually moved here specifically because of D38's capacity, capability, and passions around educating people like Drew. He's currently a student in Maureen Stutz's transition program, which is over here at Grace Best. This program is a daily program, and it's specifically designed to provide functional living skills for those who are likely unable to independently navigate our community upon graduation. And for Drew, it's really been life-changing. It provides him energy, life, joy, and fulfillment. Given that this illness, especially for Drew, is debilitating, he requires motion and interaction in order to reduce its atrophy. And according to his mom, who I was fortunate enough to interview over the weekend, our particular transition program has allowed him the peer interaction and the daily physical activity that has prolonged both his quantity and his quality of life. It's yet another example of how impactful the daily magic is that we do, whether we have COVID or we don't have COVID, and how well our kids are cared for. So my sincerest thanks to Mrs. Stutz and Mr. Frampton and their whole team for doing something that really matters and has a positive impact on a daily basis. And it's not just good for our students, but it's good for our community and our country. So thanks.
Thank you, Ron.
Yep, and that's the team, by the way. That's where the heavy lifting happens.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for visiting the transitions program too. I wanted to start off by reminding us all that Thanksgiving is next week, and I understand that Tri-Lakes Cares is doing an online form for Thanksgiving meal signups. But if you have a family that may slip through the cracks in the schools, we have our care portal at lewispalmer.org for gift cards. If you want to help a family out in our school district that might be in need, go through care portal, and I'm sure that there's some families in our various buildings that could use some help without revealing who they are. So just wanted to remind folks about that. This last week, it's been a busy week. Last weekend I was able to attend the Tri-Lakes Chambers award celebration online, and it brought me joy and pride to see our Rangers band playing and our cheer squad entertaining the group. There was a lot of us that had to attend virtually, but it really did honor and celebrate, even though you were doing it virtual, we were doing it virtually to celebrate so many of our wonderful volunteers that we have in our Tri-Lakes community. And they gave me a gift basket. I also attended MA's board meeting virtually, and something that touched my heart is that the recognition that we are one team together, and we are our team together in this, and there was a lot of kudos to the collaboration that our entire community is doing together as we weather the storms with COVID. And then also I wanted to do a shout out to Michelle Ney and Rick Frampton, who presented at our last DAC meeting. And Michelle did a really good job, and so did Rick, of sharing out some information that they also shared at our SEAC, which is our Special Education Advisory Committee, which Teresa was also able to attend. And Rick did a really great job of sharing out what our partnership is with our public health department. And also Michelle, something that she shared at DAC and that was absolutely true was when you look for those little lights and those little golden moments, those little glimmers, because we're doing our meetings virtually and through Zoom, a lot of parents that have not been able to attend our Special Education Advisory Committee in the past were able to attend and listen and input and advocate. And so those are those moments that you say, okay, something good is coming out of this too. So that's all I really have to say.
Thank you, Tiffany. Teresa?
Hi, I just wanted to double check that you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Great. So I just wanted to dovetail off of something that Tiffany was just saying regarding the SEAC meeting, because it was impressive to me, as it has been in the past, how dedicated our, not just parents, but family members are to the well-being of all of our students. And believe it or not, there was a grandmother, I believe, on the SEAC meeting who was in a completely different time zone from Amman, Jordan. And so to see that kind of commitment to trying to help her family member during these COVID times, and how best to help navigate his or her best education and opportunity was really impressive to me as a board member and as a community member. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're hearing from quite a few parents and teachers and receiving feedback that's really important to consider. And I, as one board member, really appreciate the feedback that we are receiving. These are hard times, and we have ways forward, but there is not an illuminated single pathway forward that is the perfect plan. And I think that it requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of continuing conversation. And I am grateful for the open communication we have and the willingness for our superintendent to continue to answer questions in a thoughtful and responsive way. I also wanted to acknowledge that these are hard times, and I have been been present in a number of meetings and this past month, and in every single setting, often at some point is our community because of the challenges that COVID is presenting. So I just wanted to encourage people who might be in a crisis or challenged situation with the student or with a family member, that there are a number of avenues for help, and that it's always okay to reach out. So with that, I just will say a final thank you to each of you for being there in person and for listening to me on audio. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. And thank each one of the board members. I appreciate all of your words and your thoughts, your actions, your behavior. It's been phenomenal for me this year, and I guess this is maybe one of those silver linings of what is happening here, but I did attend the DAC meeting, and I appreciated the Palm Ridge High School principal and his presentation and how well it aligned to the district as a whole. And I see the result of good leadership in our school district, and it's phenomenal to see those things. And as Tiffany said, it's, I was able to show up without, even in this environment. It's not ideal, but it is a connection. And I wanted to touch briefly on that concept, and that is connection, human connection. We are, at our core, social beings. We need human connection. And one of the great things about human connection is the ability to learn from one another, emotionally, socially, intellectually, physically. I mean, there's no end to how we can learn from our interaction. And the COVID crisis or pandemic has really limited our social interaction. This physical distancing was early on social distancing, which is understandable. But it is a problem. And there is good news on the horizon. I mean, we've all probably read that at least 2 pharmaceutical companies have come out with vaccines that are in phase 3 of their clinical trials, and they're 90% plus positive or effective. So I'm fairly confident next school year is going to be on to the future. I don't know that it'll ever be back to normal, because I don't think we'll ever go backwards. I think we'll take everything we've learned during this pandemic with us as we move forward. I just want to echo what I heard Teresa say, and that is, it's really important that if we need to reach out, there's avenues for us to reach out, to touch someone, to connect with someone. We should never feel alone. And I appreciate, at the beginning of this school year, all the training that went in to help everyone understand the need to connect. And I'm grateful for this coming Saturday, which will be the first of 9 days off. And I really do hope and pray that not only will every staff member in every school accept our appreciation for what they do, but they'll take this time to really shut down, take a break, do some R&R, and we'll see what happens in the future. I mean, I can't believe how quickly things change. I used to think, well, a weekly update would be good, but it's like hour to hour. Things are changing so fast, and I compliment everyone for dealing with the stress, the difficulty of change. Change is hard, and I appreciate that it's hard, and I know that it's hard on every individual, whether you're a student, a teacher, an admin, parents, it's hard. And I just have to, utter my respect for, Casey, your leadership, your admin, their involvement, your schools, their admin, their teachers, and all the work that they do to try and maintain what I think has been, in the circumstance, an excellent school year. Dr. Summers.
I'm going to start by thanking our board. Your support through your words, through your actions, through this entire process, even pre-pandemic, but certainly as we're working through this, is noticed, it's valued. I think it demonstrates how we're working the very best we can to provide the type of governance and leadership that a wonderful community like D38 deserves. I cannot say enough superlatives about our staff and the work that they are doing right now. It's incredible to me to see how we are rallying to multiple challenges, and I realize that those challenges get to a point where many staff have expressed a strain and a burden and an acknowledgement that we don't know that we can necessarily give that much more. I think that's real. I think it's important to understand and lean into that and make sure that our staff know that this is not something that we are trying to do intentionally, but it is really about responding to the challenges and the needs that are there. Similarly, I believe our students and our parents are doing the same thing. Our families in D38 have been really working through this as best they can each and every day. And there's just so much that's on my mind, I'll be honest. I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I would typically do in an update. And with your permission, I'd like to share an excerpt from a book that I have been reading entitled Perseverance. This is written by Margaret Wheatley, Meg Wheatley. She is a prolific author. And interestingly, this book was written in 2010. It's a series of excerpts, and I thought the one that was most appropriate to share with you all this evening is titled Dwelling in Uncertainty. And it starts with a short quote from Walt Whitman, the famous poet. "The future is no more uncertain than the present." Some people despair about the darkening direction of the world today. Others are excited by the possibilities for creativity and new ways of living they see emerging out of the darkness. Rather than thinking one perspective is preferable to the other, let's notice that both are somewhat dangerous. Either position, optimism or pessimism, keeps us from fully engaging with the complexity of this time. If we see only troubles or only opportunities, in both cases, we are blinded by our need for certainty, our need to know what's going on, to figure things out so we can be useful. Certainty is a very effective way of defending ourselves from the irresolvable nature of life. If we're certain, we don't have to immerse ourselves in the strange, puzzling paradoxes that always characterize a time of upheaval. The challenge is to refuse to categorize ourselves. We don't have to take sides or define ourselves as either optimists or pessimists. Much better to dwell in uncertainty, hold the paradoxes, live in the complexities and contradictions without needing them to resolve. This is what uncertainty feels like, and it's a very healthy place to dwell. There's a lot going on right now in terms of our current position related to maintaining in-person learning, or, as we said in our letter and update last Friday, preparing for that pivot and that need to implement a distance learning plan, as we've just seen at Palmer Ridge High School. For me, as best I can share this, there is not a moment right now that goes by, and I would say both waking and probably sleeping as much as I'm able to at the moment, where I'm not thinking about making sure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to, first and foremost, take care of our students, as well as our staff, and be responsive to the needs of our families and our community. I appreciate and really deeply understand that there is no one right path forward. But I really believe that we are doing the best that we can right now, and I certainly appreciate and value that some people may look at that and say, but that's not what you should be doing. For me, all of this speaks to the uncertainty that we are currently operating in. And I'm not going to repeat a whole bunch of what I did share in the letter that went out, but I did want to open up at least an opportunity for any questions or any other statements that the board has at this time related to the letter, as well as much of the feedback that we've received over the past few days. So with your permission, Mr. Taylor, and anybody else's comments or questions, I'm happy to field those and provide as much clarity on anything that's still outstanding.
Thank you. And thank you, talking to our teachers. Three of us sitting here currently have children in the school, and so we're navigating it as well. And I've been personally been very impressed with how we've navigated it, and that uncertainty. I guess the only question I was going to have is, I cannot remember in the letter that you wrote, how many students have we had, or teachers have we had that have had, how much spread have we had in our district? I'm trying to think of a way to say it, but within our building, person to person, that is spread. That number was low, wasn't it?
So officially there have been 3 confirmed outbreaks which represent documentable or traceable transmission of the virus within our schools. I actually referred to 4 in the letter, and there's a 4th that is still subject to some investigation, and really at this time we have learned that based on that traceable evidence, we don't actually believe it constitutes an outbreak. But that's from the beginning of the school year to this point in time. So what I can also tell you is the evidence that we have learned from the beginning of the year at a statewide level mirrors much of what we're seeing in terms of the type of transmission that has occurred in those 3 confirmed outbreaks. Clearly, there has been more positive cases, whether that's from students or staff members that end up testing positive, and based on the current contact tracing protocols are going back 48 hours from the initial exposure to a positive person that then warrants the quarantines. I think clearly we have seen a significant rise in both cases and quarantines over the past 2 weeks, essentially. Our numbers were just updated this evening on our dashboard. And what I can tell you is those numbers reflect both the active cases and quarantines as well as the total cases as well. I don't know that we need to go into each of those right now, but that is on our dashboard. We also do intend to update that more frequently as we're going forward. So we're developing a plan that will assist in that process. What I can share with people, because I know there's a lot of frustration with the lack of that being updated on a regular basis, is the amount of time it takes simply to conduct the contact tracing efforts and the burden that is borne by primarily our COVID response team, led by Rick Frampton and one of our nurses, Stacy Pierce, and all of our nurses and administrators in our buildings clearly has been a significant workload. And we don't want to publish numbers that aren't completely accurate, but there's a lot of making sure that we are getting that right. So at times when we're posting something, we're wanting to make sure that we're not just updating that without first doing the due diligence of following every case toward the number of quarantines. So hopefully that answered that question, and obviously there's a lot more that we're continuing to process through related to all of that.
To me it shows the due diligence that's gone on in our buildings, that I do feel comfortable with my children in school, and I feel more comfortable with them in their buildings and with their teachers than I do with them when they're out and about at the YMCA or a play date, which we're trying to keep our kids as confined as possible. But I just wanted to say thank you, and I also do personally appreciate the feedback, and that we're receiving a lot of feedback on all across the spectrum. And I think that is, I read every single one of them, and every single feedback means something to me. And there's something that can be gleaned from all of it.
Absolutely.
Matt? Rod? Teresa?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to what Dr. Summers and Tiffany were just speaking about. Casey, is there a lag between positive cases as reported from El Paso County Health to our dashboard? Is there a time lag?
When I heard you ask that question, Teresa, you mentioned reported from El Paso County, so I just want to make sure I'm clarifying. Are you saying cases that we become aware of from county?
Yeah, or can you just shine a little light on how a positive case gets to the dashboard? Is it self-reported by people in the community to the school district, or is it being reported from El Paso County Public Health?
Okay, thank you for that clarity. The typical notification process where we become informed of a student or staff positive case is a direct report from the individual or family where there's been a positive test directly to, in most cases, that goes directly to the school principal or the school nurse. From there, we begin to contact trace whether or not there was exposure from that individual who tested positive 48 hours prior to the beginning of what we refer to as symptom onset. So where that leaves us many times is having to work backwards to determine exactly who was within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes at a particular location and ensuring that we have an account for all the close contacts that are involved. So the time lag is one that involves the length of time that it takes to essentially ensure that contact tracing is completed. There's usually multiple conversations with the individuals who we believe to be exposed and making sure that we have a good account of where that exposure actually occurred and who we need to then reach out and contact. Because we try to, as best we can, make individual contact with all of those individuals who have been quarantined. As you can imagine, that becomes really difficult, especially in a high school setting. So, for example, we had close to 200 students that had to be quarantined, I believe 7 staff and 200 students through the most recent Palmer Ridge High School situation. That takes an inordinate amount of time just to make sure that we have that level of notification in place. So those are our priorities prior to us counting all the numbers, adding them up, and then uploading them to the dashboard. So that's part of what makes it a little more difficult for us to get those numbers updated on. I mean, literally, we could be doing this 24/7. And obviously, we have to do the best we can with the time that we have. Teresa, did that help answer?
It did. And if I could I ask an additional question?
Sure.
So I think it's accurate to say we're hearing feedback from teachers at various school sites, and I'm just wondering, Casey, how do you keep a pulse on how your teams and teachers at various sites are doing?
Yeah, that's not an easy thing to do because the ultimate determining factor right now about whether or not we're maintaining the ability to be in person is primarily a function of our ability to ensure coverage, appropriate staffing is achieved, whether that's from staff that are within the building or within subs who are filling or with whatever we need to be able to do to maintain some degree of in-person learning. I think a lot of the frustration we're hearing from teachers is that is an extremely challenging task for the individuals who may have to pick up those assignments while also maintaining responsibilities that they have with their own classes or other duties, and the fact that there's inevitably some degree of disruption that occurs when there are the isolation and quarantine protocols that we have to have in place. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position where I can necessarily attune to every individual. I think our principals are doing a really good job of trying to keep tabs on where are their staff where are their staff in terms of their needs and issues that they're having to work through to try to work as best we can through a team approach to continue to maintain the current in-person environment that we have committed to. I think the ultimate test becomes one of, are we willing to continue to persevere through the challenges as we are right now? And willing may not be the best way to say it. Are we able to? And what is the toll, what is the cost that takes? And I think what's true is that we have staff that are feeling very tired and stressed and overwhelmed, and all of that is understandable and certainly defensible. I think we also have staff who continue to express a desire to want to press forward. And what's really difficult for me is I don't want one perspective to be at odds with another perspective. So we're doing, I think, what we can right now to ensure that there is an opportunity to at least process through that information and use that to continue to be attuned as best we can to what the current environment is. We understand it's really a day-by-day, and right now at this point, a school-by-school proposition in terms of our ability to maintain the in-person learning environment that we are striving for. I do think, by and large, what we have heard, and I would say this is true of our families, including students, as well as many staff members who would like to maintain the in-person learning environment as much as possible. But I'd be remiss if I did not also call attention to the fact that there are staff members who believe that is not the best way forward. And I think both perspectives are extremely valid.
Anything else, Teresa?
No, it's helpful. What comes to mind is it's a balance point, and I think you're, as I understand it, trying to assess at all times where the tipping point is, and sometimes it's a moving point. So there's not a specific number that or percentage of any sort that would be a predictor of closing a school site. Is there?
In terms of a metric that we would pre-establish that would say after this number of isolations or quarantines, that's what pushes us over the edge? No, because it's unique to every individual building context. The county as well has not provided us with anything definitive that would say, here's when you stay open or here's when you may need to pivot to distance learning. I do think fundamentally it comes back to our ability to maintain appropriate coverage and staffing responsibilities that are consistent with making in-person learning feasible. And I think that's where you're going to inevitably run into differences of opinion. Some folks would say, we can make that work. Other folks would say, why are we even trying to make that work? It really doesn't add up. And I think not going into individual situations with all of that necessarily in this conversation, we have to really assess the unique context of each school at this time and the conditions that are taking place. Now, the other option would be to just say, we're done dealing with all of that. Let's just make the decision to shut the entire district down. Now, I will say, based on my conversations with other districts, there are those districts, I will say that they typically tend to be the larger districts that are making that decision. Part of our unique context is because we are smaller. I think we have right now the flexibility to whatever degree you believe that we can make those decisions on a site-by-site or school-by-school basis. But I also appreciate that there's a school of thought that's out there that would say, doesn't feel like that's what we should do. There's also a school of thought that extends off that says, well, what is our obligation right now to keep the community safe? And what role do we play as a school? And for me, as much as I respect and honor the fact that that is certainly a valid perspective, there is also the perspective of we have to base our decisions off of what we believe is best for our students. When I say that, I know that at times it may come across like we're not prioritizing other parties. I don't believe that's the case, but saying that may not make it so for folks that are hearing that. So I'm being as transparent and as vulnerable as I can be to say we're making right now the decisions that we think are best for maintaining what we have committed to really since the beginning of August. The other thing I would lift up is that we have actually been dealing with this for several weeks. The difference today is the numbers and the transmission rate that has increased throughout the community. And that is a real dynamic. And through all of our conversations with county health as well as state level officials, they continue to reiterate every single time we talk that it is a local school district by school district approach at this time. And I can tell you there are other districts that are still maintaining pretty much the same stance that we are. It really boils down to what is the appetite for that within our community. And I think that's where it becomes really challenging because, again, I don't want to set a staff member against another staff member or a family against another family. At the end of the day, though, none of this is being driven by a political agenda or by those that believe one thing versus those that believe something different. And that's what makes this leadership, and I call it crisis leadership, extended over a series of weeks and months, extremely challenging and daunting. And that was my purpose really with the letter on Friday, was to delineate all of that as best I possibly could, elevating the fact that we want to maintain in-person instruction for as long and as much as possible, but also lifting up the real possibility of a pivot to distance learning should the need arise. And that's exactly what happened as we went over the weekend, and that creates an inevitable ripple effect. So all those statements that I continue to utter are exactly what I'm trying to do, is say, here is the thought process, here is the rationale that we're using. And again, I acknowledge and understand that not everybody is going to see it the same way.
What's best for the kids, because quite frankly, that's why we're all here. It's all about the kids. And I appreciate everyone's position, but, one concern that I've always had, and I think you share the same concern, is, if we were to go 100% online learning, we're exchanging one set of problems for another. We've been very fortunate with our kids in this district, but other districts down south have not been as fortunate. And so as we're navigating this path, I think we need to focus on truly what is best for our kids, and I understand that sometimes our decisions as individual board members, or even as a board in its totality, is not popular, but, the end goal is to put the world-class education in front of our kids, make sure they're safe and protected, both in school, and I think their mental health in this day and age is almost as important, if not more important, than the challenges that they're facing around them.
Thank you, Matt. Anyone else? Any comments? I would like to just remind the community and the board that Dr. Summers has really implemented the broadest choice possible for all of our families, from full online to a hybrid to full time in school, given the constraints that we face. I appreciate wholeheartedly that he has done that consistently, unabashedly, and very transparently. In what he read there about the optimist and the pessimist and the sides, I'll never forget that when I signed up to serve on this board, I was reminded that this is a nonpartisan position. And it takes practice to be nonpartisan. I want to just be a witness that I've observed in 400 days now. Dr. Summers is nonpartisan. He tries to avoid pitting any side against any other side. That doesn't mean he doesn't listen. He listens to everything. And then he collaborates both with the admin and with the board on the best path forward. It may be a path that's, less traveled, but frankly, it's the right path. And I just want to, again, I want the community to know that we have an excellent superintendent. He walks the talk, and that small vignette that he wrote or read tonight, I think reflects his leadership very well. So, Dr. Summers, again, I just personally thank you for who you are, the way you conduct yourself, and I pray and I hope that every member of the entire school district has some downtime here, and that they can find some refreshment in this downtime, and that they find safety, that, nobody has to suffer through illness during this time. There's no promises, right? You can't predict what it's going to be like on November 30th, and I wouldn't ask you to. Nobody knows. But we do know that this will end. And we don't know when or quite how, but we're probably, a good ways into it. And I commend you for your leadership and for everything you've done to try and keep the options open to everyone, and to keep us well informed, not just us as a board, but the community, parents, your entire staff. So I just want to say publicly, thank you very much for your leadership and you walking the talk.
Thank you very much.
The next agenda item is D1, which is a preliminary review of the annual fiscal year 2019-2020 financial audit, comprehensive annual financial report. Shanna, and I think we're going to have somebody on the phone. Is that right? should we take a short break while you get him on the phone? Does anybody want to have a short break, or are we okay? Okay.
Hi, it's Shanna. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. All right, I've got you up to the speaker, and
Good
I think we can hear you.
All right, good evening. Am I
Hello.
coming through all right?
Good.
Hi, John Paul, we can hear you.
Can you hear them?
No, it's very quiet.
Okay. Well, they said hello. Thank you. So, if you just want to jump in, they're all pulling up the draft CAFR on their laptops right now.
All right, excellent. So we'll start with the draft CAFR. I know that there should be 3 PDFs, the draft CAFR, and then also drafts of the governance communication letter and the management letter. So we'll start with the draft CAFR, and we'll start on PDF page 7. And the plan for the presentation, again, this is a draft, so it's not final yet. We have a couple additional levels of kind of quality control review and additional things that need to happen before we can issue the final. But we wanted to present to you the draft so that you could have some input, as well as take a look at that at the draft CAFR in a timely manner. I realize that we're talking about the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020, and so I realized in this year there's been a lot of challenges and a lot of things going on since June. So I know we're looking at some little bit of dated information at this point, but you know it takes some time for the districts to close the books and get everything ready, and then also take some time for the audit procedures for us to get through what we need to get through. And so, again, just kind of to highlight what we're looking at is back towards June 30th, 2020. So beginning on PDF page 7, so with the CAFR, it's the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. And so what the CAFR includes is not just financial information, but also includes some other kind of qualitative information. So beginning on page 7 is what we refer to as the Transmittal Letter. And this outlines a lot of the mission and vision of Lewis Palmer School District. And so it's really, I think, a great way of kind of starting off in a financial report is what's the goal behind the numbers, not just, you know, what are the amounts and what are the dollars here and there, but what's really kind of the mission and what's the purpose behind all of the numbers. And so there's a number of pages. Some of this is an overview, but then there's also some accomplishments and some goals and vision of what Lewis Palmer is trying to accomplish. So moving on to PDF page 18, looking at this page as well as the following page, Lewis Palmer is part of the Government Finance Officers Association as well as the Association of School Business Officials. And so this relates to last year's financial report, received the certificates of excellence from both of these organizations, basically meaning that for financial reporting. So there's a whole, it's hundreds of pages long of checklist items of things that you need to have presented correctly in order to receive this certificate. And so the district should be really proud that last year's financials were prepared and met the qualifications for receiving this certificate. And this is always on a 1-year lag or delay. And so next year's will, so this CAFR will be submitted for the certificate, which would show up in next year's financial report. Moving on to PDF page 24. This is where we start getting more into the financial section and start with our independent auditor's report. And so on this first page of the independent auditor's report, we have a distinction between management's responsibility and our responsibility as the auditors. And so management's responsibility is to prepare the financial statements, to make sure that there is a structure in place, an internal control structure, that amounts are presented correctly, and that there's oversight in making sure that they're able to detect errors timely, and that everything is presented as it's supposed to according to generally accepted accounting standards. Our responsibility as the auditors is to review this information and make sure that it's materially correct. And so its material is based on judgment, but that's, that someone could look at these financials and, be expected to make reasonable decisions based on those amounts. So maybe it's not to the exact dollar, but it's close enough that you could, as a board, make good decisions based on the amounts that are included within these financials. So moving to PDF page 25, so the following page, the top paragraph is our opinion, and so this is kind of, hundreds of hours worth of work really goes into this paragraph to state that the financial statements are materially correct and presented fairly. And so this would be referred to as an unmodified, or kind of informally referred to as a clean opinion. And so this is the highest level of audit opinion that you can receive, and it's what, as the board, you should be expecting. You should be expecting to receive this highest level that you can rely on the amounts that are presented within the financial statement. And so, again, we're looking at the draft at this point, but this is what we're expecting to issue as we kind of close out the last portion of the audit and get the final statements issued. Moving on to PDF page 27, this is the management discussion and analysis section. This is a great place to start if you're looking at the financial information, because this has some more context. Management can write some of the explanations of why things changed. Most of the rest of the document is just straight to the facts of this is what happened, this is how that amount was determined, but this can give a little bit more context as to why, and it also has some comparison with last year's information. And so it's a really good place to start when you're reviewing the financials. And so that takes us, that section goes all the way through to PDF page 42. And on PDF page 42, or page number 1 of the financials, as we get out of the Roman numeral section and into the kind of regularly numbered section, the district presents 2 sets of financial statements. Presents one set of financial statements that has that's a long-term view of the financial position of the district, and then there's another set of financial statements that is more of the current or short-term view of the financials. So the first statement that's presented is the long-term view of the statement. And so looking at this, kind of the big items that are included that are long-term would be your capital assets, your long-term liabilities, so that would be your bonds, and then also, as of about 5 years ago, pension information was also added. And I bring up the pension information, and I know if you've been on the board or if you've looked at government financial statements in the past couple of years, you're probably familiar with this and maybe tired of hearing about it. But the pension information is just very significant, especially comes from the district's participation in the defined benefit pension plan through PARA. And if you look at this set of financials, if you look at the total net position down at the very bottom, you'll see just over 71 million presented as a negative amount in net position. And if you're looking at corporate financial statements, your net position would be your equity, and presenting negative equity means basically you're underwater, and it would be very concerning in the corporate world. Looking at school districts or charter schools or other governmental entities that participate in PARA or other defined benefit pension plans, you can see if you look on here, there's a couple of lines relating to pensions. There's the deferred pension outflows up at the top, or at the top of that section for 10 million. There's the net pension liability for about 81 million, and then there's the deferred pension inflows for 54 million. And so you need to combine all of these amounts together. You'd take the net pension liability plus the deferred inflows less the deferred outflows, and that would bring you to just about 125 million. And so what that's saying is that your net position is decreased by 125 million relating to the district's participation in para. And so if you were to factor that into the net position amount that's presented there and take that out, saying that, you know, the district doesn't have control over this, yes, there might be a long-term liability, but that's not something that the district is going to have to pay back or kind of finance. That's going to be through changes to benefit payments or increases to future contributions, those types of things. If you were to look at it that way, now the district is no longer in that negative financial position looking at this long-term set of statements. So just wanted to kind of highlight that. Again, it just makes the overall statements look like very dire, but once you kind of assess the pension information, that changes. The other thing to consider on here, just because it does have 3 lines, just like the pension, is Opeb, and what that stands for is Other Post-Employment Benefits. That also relates to para, and basically para offers to retirees healthcare subsidy. It amounts to about 1% of contributions goes towards this healthcare trust fund. And so it's a very similar kind of exercise in determining those amounts as pensions, but based on accounting standards, it's required to be presented separately, and so that's why you see those same 3 lines. You can see that that has about just over 4 million net impact, so not nearly as significant as pensions, but just wanted to mention that since that's kind of a weird acronym that you wouldn't normally see elsewhere. Moving on to the next page, PDF page 43. This is the statement of activities, or basically your income statement presented on that same full accrual basis. It reads left to right and then down. So you start with your expenses of just about 55 million. You'd then have your charges for services. So those could be, you know, student fees, or charging for lunches, those types of things, and then also grants and contributions. And so if all the district had was just those sources of, you know, grants and other charges to students, you would read that left to right, and you'd see that that would lead you to a deficit of negative 46 million, expenses exceeding those revenues. And then as you read down from there, that's why the district has property taxes and why there's this state equalization. So the state funding kind of covers a lot of, it covers that gap, leading to an increase in the net position of 19 million. And so while that net position is still a negative amount, it is a $19 million increase from the previous year. And so on this full accrual or kind of long-term basis, financial position, the district has strengthened from its position as of June 30th, 2019. As I mentioned, that does include pension information within that, and of that 19 million, about 13 million of that relates to a decrease in the net pension liability. So a pretty significant part of that really still in the income statement still relates to para. And so again, it's a little bit unfortunate that a lot of these numbers get kind of muddied with all of the pension information, but you know, it is a really big part of what the district has expenditures in and future expenditures, and so that's why now it's required to be presented again as of about 5 years ago. And that's nationwide. That's not just Colorado, and that's not just you know, Lewis Palmer. That's any school district that participates in a defined benefit pension plan would have to present similar information. Moving on to the next page, PDF page 44. This is the balance sheet for governmental funds. And so now we're looking more at that short-term, current focus basis of accounting. And so this should look a little bit more familiar with what you kind of see in the monthly financial statements. If you look, so that would be the balance sheet. If you then scroll to PDF page 46, this is the income statement, again, focused on the short-term view. And so if you look down at the bottom of this page, you'll see ending fund balance for all funds of about $25.5 million. And so that would be, again, looking at the short-term focus. You have this equity or assets that exceed your liabilities by about $25.5 million. And if you see the net change in fund balance, in the corporate world, this would be called net income of about just shy of $3.4 million. And so that's, again, showing that on both the long-term and the short-term basis that the district has strengthened its financial position from the previous year. So an increase of $19 million on the long-term focus, and then of about $3.4 million looking at the current or short-term focus. Then looking to PDF page 49, this starts the footnotes to the financial statements, and so this is one of the lengthier sections of the financials, which really kind of outlines all of the accounting policies and some additional information on almost every number that's included in the financial statements. So if you wanted more information of how that was determined, you could go to the footnotes and look up that section. Most of this is not all that interesting, but if you go to PDF page 60, kind of highlight some of the footnotes that are included in here. There's a schedule of capital assets, and so you can see the historical amounts, so basically the price that it costs to purchase these, then less depreciation. And you can see compared to last year that the district had minimal capital additions, so there were not a whole lot of purchases that occurred for capital assets during fiscal year 2020. Going to the next page, PDF page 61, this focuses on debt. And so you can see the change in the bonds as those have the regularly scheduled principal payments were made during the year, and then what the outstanding debt balance is as of the end of the year. And so that gives you a little bit more information on what bonds are still outstanding and the amounts that were paid on those during the year. Then going to PDF page 63, there's something like 15 pages of information on pensions and Opeb in here. A lot of this is straight from para, and so, probably most of you think that accounting is boring, and you're probably not wrong, but as boring as accounting can be, I think that actuarial information is even more boring, and so this is, even less interesting, potentially, part of the financials. But a lot of that is just describing how para got to some of these numbers, what inputs they had to determine that, how long they expect people to live, what investment interest income they expect to receive, looking out as far into the future as they can. And so all of that information is included within this section of the footnotes. If you look, I will highlight one table within here that I think is a little interesting to look at, and that's on PDF page 70. And you'll see it's called a sensitivity table. And what this shows is that the current discount rate, which is used to define, it kind of correlates with investment income and then also how much future payments are discounted. So if you have to make a payment, a benefit payment in the future, how much is that worth in dollars now? And so that rate that they use is 7.25%, and that's a number that they have is consistent with a lot of other entities, but they kind of just assume what that's going to be based on historical information. If they were to make that 8.25%, that net pension liability would change from 81 million down to 59 million. Or if they were to assume 6.25%, it would jump all the way up to 108 million. And so what this kind of shows is just some of these little assumptions that go into this pension information can have a really drastic impact on what the number is that's presented there. So just wanted to highlight that within the footnotes. And then following that section is kind of similar information on the Opeb, again, that smaller healthcare subsidy provided by PARA. And then there's some footnotes describing about Monument Academy and some of their financial information, as they're considered to be a component unit, and so their audited financials get rolled up into the district's financial statement.
Shanna, could I pause there?
Yep, hold on 1 second. We have a question.
Sure.
So on page 40,
Okay, on page 40,
not the, well, PDF, it's page 81, I guess.
PDF page 81.
At the bottom of the page, it has the long-term liabilities, and it shows the 2019 bond that was added for their new high school. You see that?
The series 2014, is that what you're looking at?
It's series 2019.
Oh, series 2019, yeah.
Yeah, and then you go to the next page,
Uh-huh.
and on the next page, you'll see the first section, the first table there says, here's a table for the 2014 series. And you see that in the middle of the page? Then at the bottom of the page, it also references the 2014. That should be 2019, I believe. Just a typo.
That's on page 41?
Yep.
Okay. So JP, a correction is on page 41 at the bottom. That table is applicable to the series 2019. Debt is correct, not 2014. I think it's just a typo.
Okay. I will make a note of that.
Thank you.
And then one comment before we leave the
Okay.
pension.
And then one comment, hold on.
We get some percentage of para. This isn't really measured by the demographics of Lewis Palmer School District 38. It's really just some percentage of para. Is that correct? This
is just
$100 million pension liability. What I'm saying is it's not based on our demographics here, number of teachers, their age, and all of those
Okay.
things. This is just somehow a percentage of the Colorado para. Is that accurate?
Okay, so the question is regarding para, is that, that's not directly applicable to our staff, but rather Colorado as a whole. And the
It's an allocation, essentially, from Colorado as a whole.
Yes. Does that make sense? Did that question make sense?
So you mean the liability that's presented?
Yes. On what
Yeah,
page?
so basically that amount is calculated as Hera's financial position if you were to take all their investments and all the contributions and that they're going to receive from employees and project that out 100 years into the future, and then project out all of the payments that they're going to need to make and project that out 100 years into the future, and to then discount those by that 7.25% rate that was used. And if you were to subtract one minus the other, that would be that net pension liability. So they're projecting that they currently have more future benefits that are going to need to get paid compared to the contributions coming in. And then taking that gigantic number, if you were to multiply the district's proportionate share of that, which is about 0.5%, that's where you'd get those liability numbers. So they're very big numbers that you basically just multiply a lot of them by that 0.5%, and that's what gets dropped into the district's financial statement.
And I missed the
Does that
page.
answer the question?
That is answering the question. And so there is a page, and I've skipped past it and missed it, marking the page number. It talks about that 5% or 0.005%.
5%?
Yeah, it says, and it actually year over year dropped very slightly. I think it's important that our community understands these financial statements, that number related to para is some allocation that is not based on the demographics of our specific school district. It's an allocation of the entire para financial position.
Exactly, yes.
And our percentage of the total actually dropped slightly year over year.
Oh, okay.
Can,
Okay, I think
can,
we were good
can
with
you
that.
ask John Paul to confirm what I just said? Because I'm pretty sure that's what I'm reading here.
Yes, isn't that that's how he answered you, yes.
That we did, our percentage dropped year over year.
Oh, the percentage? So did the percentage of that drop year over year, John Paul?
Yeah, so if you look, and this was real close to where we were getting to, so if you look at PDF page 89, this actually shows, and this is in the footnotes as well, but I think it's a little bit easier to see in a table format. So this shows on PDF page 89, since pension information was required to be added to the financial statements, this shows since that point as well as a year before then, just adding some of that comparison. So you can see in that second line what the percentage of Lewis Palmer, that Lewis Palmer has been of para, and that's based on employer contributions. So the amount of contributions made during the year, you take that compared to everyone else's contributions during the year, and that's how they determine that percentage that's shown. And then you can see on the third line the change in the net pension liability. So if you see, and I believe in 2017, you see that the pension liability doubled from the previous year, from 2016. And so this just gives a little bit of trend information. That was, from what I remember, a couple of years ago, there was a really bad dip in the market right at the end of December. And so para was showing some really big losses on their investments that then they didn't meet a threshold, so they had to change, under accounting standards, change that discount rate, and they had to drop it by about half. So part of that discount rate was at 3.5% or so, and so that significantly increased that liability. So again, you can kind of see some of the trend information in that table and how things have changed.
So, Shanna, while he's on that table, he's bringing up a really good point. I think the next to the last line is telling, and that's the district's proportionate share of the net pension liability as a percentage of its covered payroll, which is the district's covered payroll. And you'll notice that that percentage is as low as it's been in 6 years, 7 years, which is a good thing. You know, for the accountants that care about these things.
Okay, anything else on that?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're good with that, JP.
All right, so scrolling back up a couple of pages just to cover, there's budgetary information that compares that current those current financial statements to the budget. And so if you see on PDF page 84 through 86, that's the general fund, and it's presented in quite a bit of detail in comparing the actual amounts compared to the budget. And if you look at the total expenditures line on page 86, where it has $58.8 million in total expenditures that were budgeted, compared to $56.9 million in actual budgeted expenditures, which means that there is a variance. So actual expenditures were under budget by just shy of $2 million in that total expenditures line. And so that's showing it's required by Colorado statute that all governmental entities, including school districts, don't spend or they don't have actual expenditures exceeding budget, basically that management and employees of the governmental entity don't spend more than what was approved by the board, and so that's one of the controls in place for governments, and so that's that amount there. So just shy of $2 million is showing that the district is in compliance with that statute for the general fund, and you could see that same thing throughout all of the other budgetary comparison schedules, each of those presented by fund. So that should be, again, familiar to the board is what you'd see on kind of the monthly financial statement, looking more at that fund current level comparing to the budget. And so that budget information takes us all the way down to about PDF page 104 or 105. And this begins the statistical section. Generally, if you're flipping through the financial statements, you'll know you're in the statistical section because the font gets really tiny. And so the reason for that is that this is presented, or most of the schedules in here are presented for 10 years. And so to fit all of that information in there, the font gets really small. And so while that can be a little bit intimidating, I do think it's a good place to look for some of that trend information, kind of like what we had seen before with PARA. But this has more information specific to the district. So some of this is financial, some of it is non-financial. And so, again, it's an interesting place to look for kind of trends that have happened over the last 10 years. And one thing to keep in mind is that this section, since, as I mentioned, it does have non-financial information, this whole section is unaudited. We do take a look as the auditors to make sure that some of the financial information lines up with what's in the financial statements, but that kind of ends, and otherwise make sure that the information that's presented is in line with our overall understanding, but we don't go and double check any of the other information that's presented in there. And that's also outlined within our audit report that we looked at earlier. So just wanted to point that out, this section is unaudited.
Yeah, so excuse me, Shauna. So do you guys want to go through the unaudited section? Because I'd like to just focus on the audit, and if you have any questions about the audit, if we could. So I have a couple of questions. One is, did the auditors find any anomalies this year compared to last year?
Okay, so one of the questions, JP, is did you find any anomalies this year as compared to last year in the course of your audit?
So in terms of anomalies, I wouldn't necessarily say that anything that we saw was outside of kind of the expectations of what you'd see with the school district. And we confirm a lot of the revenues that the district receives with the Colorado Department of Education, and then we perform a number of procedures over expenditures. And so in terms of the overall financial activity, there weren't any anomalies per se. In kind of this tease off a little bit into the next section, if you scroll down into the single audit section, which is the audit over federal awards, and you can see on PDF page 131 that this is a schedule of all of the federal awards that and federal grants that Lewis Palmer receives. So that's about $1.8 million. And then scroll to PDF page 135. There was one audit finding that we had as part of the single audit relating to an over reimbursement request from the Colorado Department of Education. And so that was about $18,000 that the district requested that was in excess of the amount allowed by the Colorado Department of Education. And so what that means is basically just that the district will have to make that payment back. At this point, and Shanna, you can correct me if there's been any update in the last couple of days, but at this point, CDE has said that that amount just needs to be repaid, that there's not any other kind of repercussions or things as part of that. But we did notice, and this kind of leads into what's included in the management letter, is we did have a number of audit adjustments during the year. And so kind of correcting some of those balances. I would say the majority of that is more timing and cleanup, things, not necessarily things that would make you concerned about the financial activity of the district, but just from an accounting perspective, it just seemed to lend itself to that there should be some more review over some of the ending balances that are presented. Having been doing the audit for a number of years, I think that a lot of that has to do with kind of the turnover that's happened within the finance department over the last couple of years. And so I know Shanna working directly with her on a lot of this year. I'm optimistic and hopeful that next year, that list will be much shorter of audit adjustments and, hopefully down to maybe nothing. And so that's kind of the goal. And in terms of, again, anomalies, it's not an anomaly in the sense that it's what you'd be concerned about, but it's just a little bit messy, maybe is the right word. And so things that can just be kind of cleaned up and presented in a more in a fashion that's required for financial statement preparation without any other audit adjustments. Does that answer that question?
Yes.
And we can cover a little bit more into the audit adjustments if you want, but that's kind of the overall view of kind of what was found during the audit.
Any questions, other board members?
So that's been taken care of?
Yes. And by the way, I've heard that, I don't know the degree of what he just talked about is, but I've heard it every year. So it's not the first time I've heard it. And I'm glad to hear him say he's got an optimistic outlook, Shauna. So congratulations.
Do you have more questions? No? All right, I think that was all the questions. Did you have more you wanted to cover, JP?
So we'll just spend just one more minute on just moving out of the draft capper and into the governance communication letter. And so this just outlines just our required communication to the board as the auditors. And so basically anything significant would be summarized in this letter. A lot of it is kind of repeat from previous years since it was important last year and it's important again this year. But not necessarily things that have changed. And so looking in here, in terms of accounting policies, there were no significant changes that the district made in terms of new accounting policies or things that needed to be changed. There's some significant estimates. And then moving on to PDF page 3 of the governance communication letter, this is where we outline the adjustments that were made during the audit. And so again, kind of the same idea as what I previously described, but this just kind of lists all the adjustments that were made. And then again, we kind of have some of the other required communication, no real significant or no real changes in that wording from previous years. And so that's kind of the governance communication letter. And then looking at the management letter, this really just summarizes the adjustments that were made as part of the audit and then how to correct those into the future. Again, the majority of which can be through just an additional review or reconciliation performed at or shortly after the end of the year to make sure that the amounts that are presented are correct and have been reconciled appropriately. So that was it. Just wanted to make sure that we'd covered what was included in those other two letters, that you're just familiar with all of the reports and documentation coming out of the audit.
All right, thanks,
Any other
John Paul.
questions?
Thanks, John Paul and Shauna. What's the timing here? This says this is a review preliminary. What's your schedule look like to finalize this and get it submitted?
So I'm hoping by the December meeting we'll have the final to give to the board and have the board approve the full capper, which includes the audit.
Excellent, excellent.
That is the plan.
Don't we have to submit it by the end of the calendar year?
We have to submit to CDE, yes.
Thank you.
I have 3 other projects I'd like you to work on between now and then.
I have no doubt, actually.
That's where I may have to run interference.
So are we we need anything else from him, or can we let him enjoy the rest of his evening?
I think we're good, aren't we? Yep.
All right, thank you, John Paul. Thanks for being flexible, too.
Not a problem. All right, I really appreciate everyone's time and attention this evening. Have a good rest of your meeting and a good rest of your evening.
And I'll be talking to you soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Thank you. Bye.
So Shanna, just jump right into D2, or was there anything else you wanted to add to D1?
Well, I figured that was the most exciting portion of the evening, so did everyone want to just wrap up, or,
I do have one question on this one.
Yes.
For the corrected misstatements, when it's in the bullet points or bulleted out, can I call you if I have any questions on what some of this jargon means?
Absolutely.
Thanks. More specifically, like, for example, an adjustment was made to the pupil activity fund to reclassify 82.3. So I didn't know if that meant it was adjusted to reflect more or reflect less. And those are, going through all these, if I have any questions, I could call you.
Yes. Yep, just give me a call. We can go through one. Okay, and then for D2, I think we just have the typical monthly reports and enrollment. And I believe that we actually have also detail of the online students, just to give you a little summary there. Our numbers are sticking right where they have been, so no surprises there. Any questions on D2? I know we got to get other people on the phone for the next section.
Just for clarity, the online are included in the total numbers.
Correct,
already.
yes. Every online student is allocated to a brick and mortar campus.
But the PDF, the online PDF, is where you can see the breakout.
Yes, by grade you can see, and where they are assigned, quote unquote. And
then as far as FP&A goes, I think our plan is still to finalize the budget in January.
Yes.
yes,
Okay, so any questions from anyone on this area? Then let's move on.
all
Thank
right.
you.
Did you want to do a break first, or you want me just to get them on the line?
We're
I
ready
think
if you guys
going.
want to go.
I'm good. It's up to you guys. Let's just move forward.
All right, hold on one second.
So while they're doing that, Shanna, are you okay if I just,
Yes, please
Move
do.
forward.
Fill the blank space here while I do this.
yeah, happy to. So what's before the board now is to do any final discussion on the refunding or refinancing of the bonds we've been discussing for the last couple of board meetings at September. And if we choose to move forward, then Hilltop Securities and our council will work with Royal Bank of Canada and begin the process, which will happen early next month and likely close by the second week of the month or so. And we have both Maddie Pradanovic from Hilltop Securities and Kim Crawford from Butler Snow, our legal counsel, who've worked quite diligently along with Shanna to ensure that this is done correctly, properly, and safely, and does not add to our risk portfolio in any form or fashion as a district. So, any questions, thoughts, concerns, items that maybe are lingering that we want to make sure that we cover?
I have one question. So when I was looking at the audit pages too, do I understand that the bond series we're looking at right now is from 2006 bond, and then we refinanced in 2012, and so it's the same one that we're looking at refinancing again?
We are. It's the only one in the bonds we have that's available to be
Sure.
refinanced.
So when I look at it, it looks like from 2026 to 2030 is where we start to pay the principal, right? And the rest
Majority
is
of them, yes, they're back-end loaded,
Okay.
unfortunately, as we look back. In fact, Mr. Taylor and I were discussing that earlier. Looking back, one would consider it would have been far wiser to have been picking away at the equity on a consistent basis. Fortunately, we weren't here when those were written. We don't know what the considerations were at that time. And the way they're written by law, we're not able to alter that that percentage by year.
So I'm thinking our community wouldn't, if we have to go to our community again in the future, they would probably not, given what we know now, I think that we would have to do that differently, right?
Yeah, there's
do that, right?
Well, think so on the outside, but when one takes a look, and I'm no expert in this field, but when one takes a look at the impact on individual property taxes, oftentimes these are structured in such a manner to keep it smooth versus lumpy. And I think Mr. Taylor also had a thought in that regard as well.
Agreed. And this, as I understand it, the principal repayment is exactly the same as it is on the existing bonds. All we're doing is reducing the interest rate.
Yep.
So it's not like we're making any choices here except to reduce the interest rate.
Sure, I understand that. And this is the way most school districts do bond financing in general.
Back end loaded?
There's a lot of there's a lot of variability.
There is? Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
Second?
I'll second it. Ms. Wood, could you call a roll on that motion?
That was my thought too.
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, Teresa, do you have any questions on this refinancing?
I did. Thanks for asking. I just have a clarification. On page 17 of the resolution, I understand all of the blank dates, but the maturity date, would it not be 2021, or is that the maturity date of the new bond?
Page 17, Teresa?
Yeah, where where the interest rate is blank. I mean, it needs to be filled in, obviously, on the date that it's refinanced. But so I'm just wanting to clarify.
I think isn't the maturity date the same as the previous bond?
Yes, that would be the end of it when it's completely paid off.
It isn't.
Let's
what
double
year-
check with Ms.
Yep.
Brdanovic just to be safe.
Okay, you want me to put them on now?
Please.
Okay, I'm gonna put you guys up to the
Thank you.
microphone so everyone can hear what you have to say, and then I'll translate on my end.
Did they hear the question, or should we repeat it?
No, I need to repeat the question. So the question is on what page number?
17.
17. Page 17 of the resolution. The maturity date, is that still 2029? Is that what needs to be put in there? Maddie or Kim?
Should be a Maddie question.
Oh, you're looking? Okay.
I don't
Yeah,
have, it can't mature later than the final maturity date of the refunded bonds. So I don't have that. Maddie, do you have that with you?
Yeah, so that is the form of bond. So if you look at the top of that page, there's that language in parentheses. And essentially, there's going to be an individual bond issued for each maturity, which is why those are all blank, because there will essentially be one for every year that matures starting in 2021 through a final maturity of 2029. So there will be an individual form of bond for each of those maturity years, if that makes sense.
It does. Teresa, did you hear that?
Yeah, understood. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay.
I don't have any other questions, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to repeat what I think I heard there, Shanna. So what I heard them say is that every principal redemption is a unique bond. So there's a maturity every principal payment, essentially.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what I heard too.
Good. Anything else from anyone? Going? Oh, wait. Ms. Wood, could you call a vote on this?
Aye.
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 Comment? Wanted to thank Mr. Schwartz again for his time and effort in doing this. This was quite frankly a great suggestion. And Shanna was fantastic in assisting you, so I'm glad that we're able to kind of think outside of the box and save our stakeholders some money.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to really acknowledge Shanna and Ms. Pradanovic for doing most of the heavy lifting and making sure we're thinking through this from not just a savings standpoint, but from a diligence standpoint too, to protect our constituents and our students and our staff. And Kim. And so, ladies, thank you very much for all the hard work. And we're looking forward to the results of the hard work.
So if you guys didn't hear that, you're being thanked by the board. They have approved the resolution to move forward and have no further questions for you. So you are
Thanks, Matt.
free to go.
Well, that was easy. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks for being available. We appreciate it, and have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Thank you, Matt, for that comment. I agree. This was inspirational for me to watch this happen. And Ron and Shanna, thank you very much for driving it. So our next agenda item is D4, Strategic Plan Follow-Up on Goal number 2, ensure high-quality instruction and relevant educational experiences for all students. So with that, we have, let's see, Tiffany, are you going to participate or no?
Dr. Benton's going to be our driver.
Dr. Benton, it's all you.
Okay, here we go. This is a pretty simple document because what was asked was, what can we do in a tangible way in terms of setting some action items with some timeframes, and this is it. So tell me what you think. Anyway, some potential next steps for Goal 2. Go ahead and figure out if the items within Goal 2 are exactly where we need them to be, and co-develop talking points to make each item accessible to the community. So one of the components of our conversation was to make sure that everything that we are communicating about Goal 2 is something that we can coach the board on, as well as so the board can then have conversations with the community in a more accessible way. So the time frame would be over the next 3 months to be able to work through that. Then share the talking points with the board to gain feedback and then refine them. So you can kind of see we've divvied up the work. That would be the work sessions in the spring. And then develop a process for a shared vision conversation related to Goal 2, including our current LPSD vision, altitude framework, and stakeholder feedback. So we actually have a variety of different tools already that we have gathered feedback over the last 6 to 7 years. And so I figured we should take some of that work that's been done and figure out if we can start from there and then move that conversation forward. And so we're looking at hopefully the ability to do that in a face-to-face fashion next fall. And then engage in various community groups and have conversations with our community all of next fall. And that would be in conjunction or in partnership between the board and the executive team and anyone else that we would like to bring along for the ride.
So Chris, what I like about this is this plan lays it out so that when we talk about, when we're always talking about our long-term goals, how does that goal number 2, what does long-term look like? And when we have a DAC or a parent who's sitting and asking, what is your vision? What is your goal? How it pertains. This helps to be able to share it in a way that can be consumed and understood and regurgitated.
We spent a lot of time a week ago, wasn't it?
It wasn't that long ago.
So I would publicly like to just note that for those who want to see the depth of the review and study we did a week ago, to look at the board docs meeting minutes under, just a second, I'll look, sorry. It's under C1. There's a very long document that went into a lot of detail. One of the things that I want to comment on here is that, you know, you've seen the sign, or I don't know if they're still out or not. They were pretty worn out, but on a great path. And what the long-term strategic plan is to where? So hopefully, you know, as we continue down this path, particularly after we get past the pandemic, you know, we actually can go back into our community and really have some good dialogue. But the framework that's being put together by Teresa and Ron and Tiffany and Matt and myself and all of your admin is phenomenal, because it actually lays out a plan to see what does our community want the school system to look like long term. That's one comment. The second comment here is, I don't want to lose sight of your three-legged stool. I like it. And the reason I like it is because it talks about, you know, your curriculum and your instructional philosophy and your assessment process. I want to key in on the instructional philosophy. So there's probably a slightly different instructional philosophy in elementary school than there probably would be in high school. Is that a fair, or am I just making that up?
In terms of pedagogy,
Yeah.
there are best practices that are better suited for different developmental groups, and I would agree with that.
Okay, good.
As well as different formats, whether it's online or if it's hands-on or.
Good. I just have to check that I'm in the ballpark with you, Dr. Benton. So, for example now, there are charter schools, there are private schools, there are public schools. Do they have different instructional philosophies, or what'd you call it, pedagogy?
Pedagogy.
I apologize. Is that accurate?
Some do, yes. They have different instructional methodologies. Even, you have the, I think it's the fifth grade program in B20 that is School in the Woods. And it's a completely experiential school for kids in nature. So there are a variety of different types of pedagogies as well as curriculum, as well as assessment.
Excellent. And so part of what my thought process here is, I would like to understand all of those. I would like to be able to, even in our community, have those kind of conversations about, here are possibilities, if you will, and this is what we do, right? And it's probably at an elementary, perhaps transition years, I don't know, and high school. But the point I'm making is, I wouldn't know the difference unless you told me. And I think maybe perhaps a lot of the community might feel the same way. I think it would be good in this area that we really help our community as much as we can understand what are the options. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And is it possible in this timeline that we're looking at?
I think so. I think we can embed some of that in there. I think we can also, I mean, part of it is that we're telling our story as the district as to what we provide. And, you know, each school has a little bit different narrative, but there are a lot of consistencies between the level, you know, within elementary, then middle, and high school. But we also have post-secondary programming that we offer, and career and technical education. We have so many different things. I think we could tell that narrative.
Well, I think what I'm trying to get at is there's a universe of possibilities, perhaps, of instructional philosophy, and why are we where we are as opposed to the others? Is it budgetary? Is it training of staff? I mean, there could be all sorts of reasons. I don't know any of them, but you see where I'm going with this? Is just, you know, are we, because the aim again, strategic plan is, where do we want to be in 5 or 10 years? And if we're not there today, then what are we going to do over the next 5 or 10 years to get there? And I think this is a key piece, is why I'm going where I'm going with this.
Right, and I can tell you different examples of how we have reviewed our data, our metrics within that assessment component to be able to make a different trajectory within our own programming we provide. That I think we can do within this time frame. And an example is our Innovative Learning Program that is actually a special program. We're one of 5 entities in the state that's being funded for this type of programming. It's brand new. This is our first year, and we're learning a lot, but we're trying to meet the needs of our students very differently based on our metrics. So we can tell that story of how we got there and what we did to get there. We did do research about other programs and that sort of thing, and why we landed where we landed as a district. That we can do.
So, just so I know, or you know, I understand. So what I heard you say is that based on all the assessment work over time, you've evolved to where we are, and you'll continue to improve based on assessment, which is one of the 3 legs. What I'm asking beyond that is, what is it that if you could do anything you wanted, and you had no limitations, no barriers whatsoever, what would you recommend? And then what's the cost, the roadmap, the time, whatever, to get there? Is it even practical, right? Now, I don't want to do anything that's not practical. I'm really looking long-term, what would you do? What would you do in this school system to improve it beyond just the monitoring, the assessment process? I mean, if you could just do anything based on what's available to be done in education systems, what would you do, if anything? And if there's, I mean, if we're there, fine. But you get my what I'm asking for?
I do, and the only time we get to think like that is when we're in program ideation. So it's a very interesting concept to look at it district-wide. So I'll have to mull that over, honestly.
Good. Dr. Summers, I want to make sure that I'm staying within reasonable bounds. Is this make sense to you, that what we're looking at is where would we like this school system to be in 5 and 10 years without being too narrow in our focus on current assessment and process of continual improvement? Is there anything beyond that we should, you called it ideation, brainstorming, that kind of thing. And I would like to bring that into play here if possible. And it needs to be practical. I don't want to get too far out of bounds.
Absolutely. I think there's a few things that I would just elevate beyond what's already been shared. One is that we often do not give ourselves permission to think about what's possible because we are working in many cases within the constraints of a system that is highly governed, standardized, compliance-driven, which I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be those data points and items that we need to be accountable toward, right? At the end of the day, we are a public education institution. At the same time, what I hope gives our educators, our students, our families, our community, something to aspire to, and that's really what we're striving for with the shared vision, is what is it about the learning environment and the experiences that we can cultivate for our students on a day in, day out basis, on a year in, year out basis. If we think about where our kiddos start from the early education years all the way through the continuum of our system, we have a lot of great success that we can point to, and I think we're always willing to continue to learn, to continue to grow and evolve. So the only other piece I probably would elevate at this point is making sure that as we're doing that, we give ourselves permission to call out potential contradictions. And part of what I mean by that is our educators' plates are extremely full, and so they feel sometimes as if we are adding to. I want to make sure that we give ourselves permission to also take things off that plate. In fact, we may be able to give ourselves more flexibility and more latitude by identifying what are the things that really, if we could take that off our plate, then what would we replace it with? And for me, the real important ingredient in this whole process is making sure that we are attuned very closely to our teachers' lived experiences, as well as elevating student voice in this conversation. And of course, including our parents and our greater community as part of a greater philosophical orientation. But if you think about, I often like to say, where the magic happens is each and every day in each and every classroom, right? So it ultimately comes down to making sure that we are supporting our students and our teachers to be able to create that magic and create possibilities that may not exist right now. So what's exciting about that is we are thinking about what's possible, and we're still acknowledging that there are limitations and constraints that we have to work within. But that, to me, is really the exercise, is giving ourselves permission to go outside those boundaries from time to time and say, let's imagine that. What might that look like? As well as giving permission. I think Dr. Benton brought up the Innovative Learning Opportunity Pilot Program. And one of the brilliant pieces about that program is, let's try it and see what works. And here's the thing. If something doesn't, that's okay, because you learn from that. In fact, we want to give permission in our system to try those types of processes to see what's possible and continue to use that iteration process in order to be able to achieve something greater than what we would be able to if we just continue to work within the set boundaries that we currently exist in.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And I would just, to add to that is, public education has more constraints than a private educational school, or
Absolutely.
perhaps even a charter school. And so a lot of that, I think it's good that we really look at all of those issues, because there are limitations of what can be done. And I think it's good to make sure our whole community understands the dynamics, if you will, of a school system and what you can and really can't do. But I would just add this concept of ideation, innovation, and being able to think outside the box is what I'm hopeful that this big rock will display in a year or whatever time it takes us to get there, so that we can actually have conversations in our community about the direction long-term that we would like to see. And what I heard the two of you say is, it's going to come from teachers. It's going to come from everyone. This isn't from you. This is from teachers.
Absolutely.
I love that.
And I would elevate the student voice piece. We get a lot of
Students and
information
families.
from our students and our most recent graduates.
Beyond assessments, right?
I would call that, so when you say assessment, I hear metrics. So you can't just think assessment like a test. There are a variety of different metrics that we use, including perception surveys, feedback surveys, things like that. And one of some really great information we get from our graduates helps us be able to give teachers information about what worked for them and what didn't, and what do they wish they had in their experience. So those are pieces that are as equally important in that third leg of the stool.
Much like Ron asking our high school senior about what could we do better in the K programs, right? I mean, it's
Right.
similar.
Yep.
Qualitative and quantitative
Correct.
assessment. Excellent.
And that's that foundation of the stool, involving parents, community board, environment, teachers, students.
Any comments, please?
We'll turn to the on versus the off button, huh? I think this is the hardest of the goals or big rocks, to actually show measurable and lasting results. And the fact that you were able to synthesize it into a 12-block, one-page, simple, absorbable diagram is a big deal. That we are in a highly regulated, highly mature, and highly opinionated environment that has to be transparent, to use Dr. Summers' term, vulnerable, and get it done anyways. That makes this by far and above the hardest one of the big rocks to move. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and make one kudo/continued recommendation. If you guys can keep doing this as we communicate to all the constituents, it's going to make our job a lot easier to get to the promised land on this thing, which will be an ever-moving evolution. But to keep getting better and to synthesize and keep it simple is really, really valuable in a scenario like this. So great job.
Teresa, do you have any comments?
I do. Simply comments, I'll add. and sitting here and looking at these 4 steps under the what column, it occurs to me that could be a loop, right? You can engage various community groups in the shared vision, and then you can go right back to reviewing the items within goal 2 and just keep looping around. And the other comment I have is, to me, the most perhaps, I don't know how to term it, effective work of this is in the conversations in block 3, because it's at that juncture of having that conversation where the collaboration can occur and where more creative outcomes might bubble up. So those are just my thoughts. I don't have anything specific, but I appreciate the work that's gone into it, so thank you.
And we appreciate your thoughts. So I had one other concept here I wanted to talk about briefly, and that is, I think in Big Rock number 1, we were talking about the environment and equity in education. I want to overlay that with what we're talking about here too, because I think it's important that graduates of this system are well educated and ready to learn, because all we're really doing is setting the stage for the rest of their lives. And if I've learned nothing in my life, you're always going to be learning. So I think it's really important that as an outcome that they aren't necessarily have a bias about politics, religion, etc., race, all those things that we worry about, being neutral on. I think it's important that the outcome of the education system has graduates that don't have a bias other than what their parents or their family or, the bias, can we remove bias from our educational system, our process, so that these students can leave here open-minded, willing to look at multiple sides of everything, rather than having a bias toward any one side that is generated or perpetuated within the system.
I think that's a really interesting question, because I would say that you really can't eliminate bias. You can recognize it and you can work through it. And that's actually our job, is to help kids understand and recognize bias within whatever, whether it's learning the art of argumentation within writing, whether it's understanding a civics unit, whether it's working through a biology unit. It's about understanding different bias and understanding their perspective and the rationale with which they choose that bias. We all have bias. That's just the way we are. We're actually wired that way on purpose. It's a survival tactic. So, interesting question. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, I think there's another way to look at that from my perspective, which is, one, perhaps the most important day in any student's trajectory over their course of an education in our system is the day after they graduate and beyond. That's one component. I think the second is making sure that we're very clear about not so much a system that is conditioning our students to think a certain way, or in other words, teaching them what to think, but instead facilitating an environment and a learning experience that cultivates how to think critically, how to be civically and globally aware and engaged. We saw a great example of Caroline this evening, which I think speaks to a caliber of what many of our students in our system demonstrate, as well as what we want every student to be able to aspire to, is being a caring contributor to society. What does that mean? Being able to be prepared fully for whatever the future pathway may bring, so that students have choice and that they have the opportunities where many doors are open as opposed to any specific door that we're trying to choose for them. So there's a lot that's within that statement that I think as we frame that shared vision, it's less of just what we want as a system, but more how we enable each and every student in our system to be able to achieve whatever their full potential is that they are trying to realize.
Just as they have multiple teachers through the course of this education system, you know, I think what I'm trying to say, and I'm not articulating it perfectly, but what I'm trying to say is that a teacher and their inherent biases should be set aside, just as I had to run for this board seat and I committed to be nonpartisan. That, which is not an easy thing to do because I have my biases. I understand that. So what I'm saying is to the degree possible, what you just said is it's not what, it's how, it's that process of learning that just needs to be paramount, right? Because I remember my favorite teachers and I remember the ones I didn't get along with because we had different biases or whatever, right? But the point being is the ones I respected the most in my formal education was those who challenged me the most to think differently than I came into the classroom thinking, which is the how, not the what. Those who tried to get me to believe a certain way, I rejected. It was just my nature. But my point, coming back to this, and I'm not making accusations here either. I'm not suggesting that we have a problem. I'm just talking about a public education system needs to be able to produce students who the day after graduation know how to learn, know how to look at anything and think about it with some intellect and not be too biased.
One additional stakeholder group that I think would be invaluable to us in this process, obviously listening to our current students, our teachers, our staff, our parents, our families, as well as students who have already graduated from our district, our alums, particularly those that are within 3 to 5 years of graduating. What did we do well? What didn't we do so well? Just framing opportunities and questions that allow them to say, here's how it was positioned. And I think we can learn a lot from kids, adults at that point, who can come back and share some of those lessons with us.
Which again, what Ron was doing real time, I liked it.
And that's a form of measurement too.
I am going to just say something that's political. And that is, in society today, there is a perception that our youth and our colleges bring out liberal tendencies. I want to be careful about what I'm saying here because I want my children to think about things liberally. So I want them to, to consider as much as possible. I want them to learn liberally, but I don't want them to be liberal. I hope that makes sense, because there is that common perception that our education, our public education system in this country has a liberal political leaning. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it's out there and it's a real perception. And anything we can do to help mitigate that misperception, we should. I don't think we ignore it. I don't think we, and let's just assume it was, all our kids are coming out ultra-conservative, hard right. Well, I don't want that either. I'm not looking for an outcome. I'm looking for us to be able to do this in such a way that people can appreciate that this is about education, using our minds, and let them have their independence. I hope that makes sense. Any other comments?
So going back to these 12 boxes, I think that this is where we start moving forward in, and if you notice, it doesn't end with the end of fiscal year 2020. It continues. And I like when you ask Chris, where does the path lead? And what is the measurement for that?
Any organization that is committed to continuous growth and improvement, engages in shared vision processes that are recursive, that are iterative, that are ongoing. And I think the other thing that builds into that is we expect that those are conversations that are also happening and work that's happening that's reflected in each of our campuses, that we can support and align, not necessarily from a place of telling a school to do it a certain way, but to leverage the collective genius, if you will, that we have together to share best practices, to share ideas, to allow everyone to retain a level of autonomy, as well as the strength of a system that is really committed to every student's ultimate success. And I think when we frame it that way, in terms of what do we need to make sure that we're doing for every single student, that's what's going to continue to propel our system toward actually delivering on that promise, because that's what we want. At the end of the day, these are all our kids, so we want each and every one of them to be supported, to grow into who they are capable of becoming, and that is the choice that they make individually over time. I appreciate that we can have this conversation both philosophically as well as ultimately what is that bottom line, because that's where all these goals then, and I appreciate what you said, Ron, in terms of this may be one of the most challenging, and I would dare say probably the most important at the end of the day from the standpoint of it's about each and every one of our kids.
Yes.
And I would just add, I love this conversation. It feels open and honest, and I would add that our communication, has not had the right talking points. I have, in my 3 years here, I've never talked about this. I wished I could have more, because again, it's the core of the education system. But it does have financial consequences. It does have communication and all the rest of the foundation. So thank you so much, Dr. Benton and Tiffany, for all the work you guys have done to put this to where it is today. Dr. Summers.
Looking forward to next steps.
And Mr. Frampton as well.
Thank you.
All right, so let me find where we're at here. I'm on last month's meeting.
D5.
We're
almost there.
Yeah, we're almost there. We're on D5.
You surely can.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Wood?
Aye.
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 Yes.
Second.
Any discussion?
I have one question I'd like to ask on E3. Personnel items. On substitute teachers, I wanted to ask a quick question on this. Seeing as how it seems we're seeing a shortage of substitutes throughout the state. In our list of subs, are there any that we have on that list that have not been, that just have fallen off, or we haven't, is the list extensive and there's people that we should probably, that aren't really in our pool of substitutes anymore? In other words, let's say we have this list of substitutes and we've got 20 subs, but only 5 ever respond. Do we ever cull that list down? Okay. And then my next question would be, do we do anything to reward, do we have any type of substitute teacher reward? Like, do they get some of the same benefits? Like, if there's a teacher appreciation discount at, I don't know, Kohl's or Tuesday morning, something like that. Do subs get to take advantage of that also? Are there, what's the word I'm looking for?
Perks.
Perks, thank you. Yes, that word.
So in
Yeah.
other words, they are thought of as district employees, but without being eligible for the full slate of
Sure.
benefits that we afford to all of our full-time employees. I think what you actually are speaking to is a bigger question in some ways in terms of how do we continue to attract,
Correct.
retain, and support substitutes. I mean, it's just a real challenging time right now
Sure.
across the board. I will say that I do think we have a portion of our substitute force who has been extremely dedicated and has persevered through a lot of challenges. That being said, we also have several subs who are still just not completely comfortable subbing, and that's true of the entire substitute workforce as far as I understand it across an entire region. So, I mean, it's definitely a good topic for us to continue to keep out in front, but yeah,
Okay.
a lot that goes into that.
That was the only question I had.
Can we go ahead and call roll on that then? Oh, Ms. Phillips, did you have any questions about the consent agenda or comments?
No, I'm good to go.
Excellent.
Aye.
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 There's no more. I guess we can adjourn.
Aye.
Thank you.
Need a gavel. Yeah, fistal work.